Hi, I'm Ed Bacon, the rector of All Saints Church, Pasadena. Whoever you are and wherever you find yourself on the journey of faith, I hope that you'll find something here that speaks to you. Welcome.
As far as I'm concerned, in the beginning was Betty Weigel. I met Betty Weigel 41 years ago. I was not an infant. That's right. I'll explain who I am in just a minute, but some of you know who I am and go back that far and will remember myself and some of the acolytes still here and family still here and Bill. And in the beginning, for all of us, as we came into the church and began to serve as acolytes, in the beginning there was Betty Weigel. 41 years, Betty. I guess you're one of my oldest friends in the church. Longest term friends in the church. Yes, can you believe it? I'm 53 years old. That may not seem so old to you, but I know I'm getting old. You know how you know you're getting old? You can't tell the difference between the 50 Shades of Grey and the 8 Habits of Love. To me, they both read the same. All about being unbound and set free. And in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Those words are as mysterious as they are ancient there in that first chapter of the Gospel of John, which we read every second Sunday of Christmas. I could try to exegete them for you, explain them to you, give a long and involved sermon about the power and the meaning and the origin of those words, but let's not have me do that, all right? Let's trust that those words are a poem full of sacred knowledge, a poem that preserves in image and metaphor, in incantatory language, keeps there the whispers overheard from the higher spheres. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then there's more in that poem. The Christmas portion. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. Let's not try to explain those words. Let's not try to prove those words. Let's just inhale them. Inhale the image of them. Marinate in the metaphor of them. Overhear in them the whispers from the higher spheres. There's a poem by Wallace Stevens that has become very important to me in my spiritual musings. He wrote, "We do not prove the existence of a poem." Don't you love that? We do not prove the existence of a poem. A poem is something seen and known in lesser poems. A poem is the huge, high harmony that sounds a little and a little, suddenly, by means of a separate sense. The poem is, and the poem is not, and therefore is. We do not prove the existence of a poem. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. We cannot prove the existence of that poem. But little, by means of a separate sense, might we each hear this second Sunday of Christmas that the Word has come to dwell among us, dwelling in the flesh. So that's my sermon. It's the shortest sermon I've ever preached in this pulpit. The shortest sermon I've ever preached in any pulpit. But before I sit down, I would like to speak some about the verger Betty Weigel, who embodies powerfully that poem, that the grace of God has become flesh and lived among us. And from this blessing, we have received grace upon grace. Those are words that seem to fit her so well. Now, maybe I should introduce myself. I'm Tim Safford, and I know many of you have become a part of All Saints since I left. I left in 1999. I went back east to serve Christ Church in Philadelphia. I was a priest here on the staff from the late 80s through the 1990s, working with George Regas and working with Ed Bacon, working with a pantheon of church staff and devoted and committed people. It was among the greatest years of my life in the church, and those were great and wonderful years. During that era, some of you will remember, we shut down the sanctuary for a period of time, right? And we went down to the Forum. Anybody remember that? Lived in that Forum. 4 services a Sunday. I think they were like 8:50, 9:40, 10, 15, and 11 or something. I mean, it was just boom, boom. And somehow we did that. And the one who really allowed that moment to happen with tremendous grace, in my memory anyway, was Betty Weigel. And as we prepared to come back into this newly renovated, expansive space, wanting to bring new life to the liturgy, new openness, new sense of inclusion, of prophetic witness, we thought maybe that it was time to retire the office of verger. Now, there was a saintly man holding the position of verger at that time, Don Perry. Remember Don? But he was ready to give up the verge, and and we sat in a staff meeting and talked. Well, maybe that's it. We're not trying to be old and English and kind of like some old Gothic church. We're going to try to be the open, expansive church. We don't need a verger any longer. Now, remember that none of us had any idea what a verger was or what a verger did. I bet nobody still has any idea what a verger is or what a verger does. Vergers are just, you show up and a verger's at the church. They kind of come with churches somehow. And they're always a glum, dour or dour, and act like beef eater guards at the Tower of London. I mean, that's what a classic verger looks like. And if you look up what a verger is in the ecclesiastical history books, it says, well, a verger is the one who holds the verge. And so you look at what a verge is, and a verge is a stick. So, that's all we got. A verger is the one who holds the stick in worship. I mean, I have a verger at Christ Church. For 13 years, he's just scared the hell out of me. He was there when I was arrived. I think he was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. I'm not sure. So we were knocking this around. Let's just break this model. Now, I'm sure if I don't have this memory right, and my memory favors me, my colleagues will correct me if I don't have this correct, but I'm pretty sure that in that staff meeting, I'm the one who said, I think Betty Weigel would be an excellent verger. And then there was an uncharacteristic silence. I think there were two thoughts going through the collective staff mind, kind of one of those Malcolm Gladwell blink moments. First, Betty had already been serving really as the verger for 20 years. But, there was still some gender bias and some role plays about women and their roles in the church, and also who the verger was. And so Betty was really the platonic form of verging ever since she kind of came in and started doing the acolytes in 1971, and being a part of the altar guild with many of you and doing that important duty and overall duty. But I don't think even the All Saints staff could maybe see her in that role. We had those blinders on. But secondly, I think that silence was there because Betty wasn't dour, glum, or scary. Which, as far as the staff of All Saints knew, were the three main requirements to be a verger. But I knew a different side to Betty. Because I had served as an acolyte under her in 1972 and following. I knew the terror that she could inflict. I can remember that day like it was yesterday, September 1972. My first Sunday as an acolyte at All Saints. I was 13 and I was petrified. My job on that first day of acolyting was, this may surprise some of you, was to carry the American flag in procession. We carried the American flag every Sunday in procession. And when the acolytes got up there to the high altar, the American flag and the Episcopal flag had to cross right in front of the procession across. And we never could remember what side, and it ended pretty soon after that, but it was a scary first job. And Betty was just totally reassuring to me. She coached me through it. She fitted me in a perfectly white, perfectly ironed kata. That's the robe an acolyte wears. And encouraged me some more. And then, physically, she checked me for gum. And warned me that if I ever left my perfectly ironed kata on the floor rather than neatly hung on the hanger, I'd have to walk home from the Mount Wilson Observatory alone. So I knew that Betty had what it took, what it takes to be a world-class verger. Maybe I exaggerate a little. But Betty, you've exaggerated about me for decades now. For decades, you have spread that scandalous rumor, claiming that when I was an acolyte, you would catch me sneaking out of worship during the sermon and running down to the Thrifty drugstore to buy ice cream. Remember Thrifties? Yeah. Remember, 5 cents a scoop. Remember that? And that funny little scooper gun? Yeah. Yeah, Betty used to accuse me that she would catch me doing that. And it's absolutely unequivocally untrue. You never once caught me. Moving on. Betty would ask me after George had appointed her officially to become the verger. She would ask me, well, what does a verger do? And I said, Betty, I don't know. Just be yourself. And that is why she is such a tremendous, grace-filled, worshipful, including, loving verger. One of the first things that I noticed about Betty as she became the verger, and I notice you today, it's the same. She just wouldn't carry the verge. She's the vergeless verger. It just didn't suit you, I guess. And I think that this is absolutely right because, it looks like a weapon. It looks like a stick to, beat back unruly choir members, or to keep people at the door or something like that. And as I watched Betty, in her radiance, take on that role of verger, to claim it as her own, she would not walk as if she had a stick in her hand. And you can see this today. She'd walk in the most lovely and graceful way, sort of with her hands at her sides, but out as if she were gathering us around the edges, like a hen gathers her children, to use that biblical image, bringing all of us into the grace that she knew so powerfully, that was the Word that was God, that became the flesh and lived among us. Betty, in her body, knew that poem, and it has never had to be proven to her. Even in the hardest of times, your faith has been a gift that has brought us grace upon grace. Somehow. Now, I picked up off the communion table something known as a purificator. Now, you all, some of you will know what a purificator is or maybe have paid attention to it, but many people who probably come to church here each and every week or just visiting maybe take for granted what the purificator is and how important it is. It's a square, 12-inch square piece of linen. And it's used to wipe the lip of the chalice after someone receives the chalice. The purificator wipes the edge of the chalice, and then we go on to the next person. And the history of and the science, it's soft science. Bill Wheaton may be after me about this, but the science is that the high alcohol content of the wine in the chalice, that's why you all like it so well, and the gold lining of the chalices and the linen here, that when that all comes together and moves across the edge of that chalice, it is, hence the name, purified. And a purificator, to be effective, must be meticulously ironed into 9 panels. There's theological significance to that, but it's also the only way that the chalice bearer can kind of get the purificator both on the inside of the. I know, trust me, I know you're glazing over on this, but I'm really into this stuff. Get the purificator both on the inside and the outside of the chalice, and then the 9 panels are a way in which the chalice bearer can keep track that you don't go back over the same area. You know, we wipe the chalice and then we move it and then we can look back. And let me tell you, I mean, after communion, these things are a wreck. You know, and they're full of lipstick and wine and other things, which we won't mention. And then they have to be restored to this perfect condition for the next week. On a Sunday, you use 16 of these. On Christmas Eve, I learned you use 50. Now, there are many people I know who do them with Betty and who have done them over the years with the Altar Guild and the extended community. But I just wanted you to look at the purificator today when you come to communion and know that chances are that Betty Weigel, not out of duty, not out of burden, but out of joy, labored on it for you to take that chalice and receive that grace. In these 41 years, you must have done tens of thousands of these, as well as every fair linen, as well as every acolyte kata. I mean, I want to be careful and not sound like one of these, condescending male clergy who, talking about how wonderful the Altar Guild is, that they do all the ironing. I mean, an iron in Betty's hand is like a scalpel in a doctor's hand. The iron in the hands of Betty Weigel is like the bat in the hands of Jackie Robinson. Both a tool of ministry and an instrument of love dedicated to the glory of God in sheer poetry of motion. That's what this purificator is. You see, the poem, I'm sure, when Betty labors on these, is on her heart and in her hands. And it is as if she is pressing that poetry right into this linen so that it will beckon you to come and receive abundantly God's grace upon grace. That poem ends. From the word's fullness, we have received grace upon grace. And Betty, we give thanks to God that for 41 years you have made that poem alive and real at this table and in this church. And today, I think that poem reads, from Betty's fullness, we have all received grace upon grace.